Let's continue talking about carbohydrate disorders. I want to review some of the information on insulin resistance. I want to remind you that someone with insulin resistance can have normal blood glucose levels, but high blood insulin levels. Those are two different things. What's happening with insulin resistance is that the membranes of the cell are resisting the effects of insulin. So it's not letting glucose into the cell. So the pancreas has to pump out more insulin just to maintain blood sugars and to maintain normal blood sugars. And eventually over time, what happens is insulin production begins to slow down and blood glucose levels slowly begin to rise. How long does this take? It could be years that a person has normal blood glucose levels but high insulin levels. That's why metabolic syndrome is an array of different symptoms that need to be treated and is a prequel to the development of type 2 diabetes, to the development of heart disease. I used to think that there was no such thing as prediabetes. It was like being a little pregnant. But as science works, as we get more information and we learn more about it, I have seen enough information and been to enough meetings to know that there is a condition called prediabetes. You don't need to remember the exact numbers. I think what I want you to remember, what I said is that I want you to remember normal blood sugars are between 70 and 110. This on the right are fasting blood sugars, and that's why normal. But a person can be pre-diabetic if their blood sugars are in the range of greater than 100 and less than 125 milligrams per deciliter. If a fasting blood sugar is over 126, that's diagnostic. Of course, it would be followed up with other blood tests, but that's a really strong indication that a person's insulin resistance has now turned into type 2 diabetes. And this metabolic syndrome, as I mentioned in the previous lecture, can be diagnosed if 3 or more of these symptoms are found. The thing is that each one of these can be treated differently. So it is possible to slow down the rate at which a person may be on that road to developing illness, and maybe even be reversed. I'm not quite ready to say reversed. I'm ready to say controlled. If these numbers are all under control, the person no longer has metabolic syndrome. Some of the long-term complications have to do with the fact that the blood sugars over time aren't being regulated. So at the level of the blood vessel, here are some of the things that can happen. Macrovascular disease, meaning large. Macro means large, vascular means vessels. Large blood vessel disorders include heart disease. And it's the microvascular diseases, though. The microvascular disorders result from blood sugars not being able to stay within normal range in the tiniest diameter blood vessels known as the capillaries. So in the blood vessels of the eye, the person can develop retinopathy. What happens is glucose can deposit in the blood vessels, affecting vision. A lot of times the eye doctor may be the one who first notices these changes in the blood vessels when they look in your eyes. Neuropathy is when blood sugars at those tiny diameter blood vessels in the nerves are not regulated over time. And what happens is numbness can develop. I'll talk about in class what I used to say to a diabetes group when I would meet with them at the Chelmsford Health Center. If I forget, please remind me. But it was called Sweet Talk on Managing Your Diabetes. Nephropathy is kidney disease, when these tiny diameter blood vessels in the kidneys are not being regulated. Blood sugars affect the kidneys. So kidney disease, nerve damage, and eye damage, along with heart disease and stroke, are long-term complications of poorly controlled diabetes. Can happen with type 1 or type 2. I want you to read the case studies of Morgan with her case of diabetes. I want you to, we will talk in class, be able to distinguish between the type 1 and type 2 diabetes. Please look online for her story as well as Andrea's story. We have a type 1 and a type 2 diabetic case study, and I'd like you to be able to answer these questions. Measuring blood sugars has gotten easier over time, although folks still don't like poking their fingers with the apparatus down here on the left, a glucose meter where you poke your finger, drop of blood goes onto a glucose strip, you put it in a machine, and it looks at your blood. There are folks who have continuous glucose sensors on an insulin pump. If you have insurance and support, this can work very well for folks. Do you know anybody with type 1 diabetes who is measuring their blood sugars in this way? I'd like to hear about it. After talking about diabetes, let's just talk a little bit more about what glucose is